Well, this afternoon we've got a series of talks, including a number of people who have Aniridia and others. So we have Living with Aniridia by Miriam. There you go.
Excellent, thank you. When I was first asked to do this talk, I had no idea really what to put in it, because I suppose Aniridia has always been part of my life, and I hadn't really looked back to see how it had actually affected me, because I adapted slowly as my vision deteriorated. So I knew from a really young age that I was going to sort of end up losing my sight, but I went to mainstream school initially, and although I knew I was different because of my parents had visual impairments, I didn't really consider myself as an individual as very different. I was just one of the kids that went to school with pink framed NHS glasses, like a lot of kids, and it was just part of who I was. So it did cause a bit of bullying and things, but I think it helped me learn people's perceptions really early as to what people perceived you to be as a visually impaired person. So you got lots of different input. So mainstream school was actually really good for me. I think that set me up better initially than going to special school later on, because I had an idea of what the world was going to be like, and that it wasn't going to be necessarily a very easy road. I remember at school all the challenges that you had, especially at mainstream, sort of having to sit in the front row to be able to read the blackboard at that time, because I could see about 2 meters, and also my friends having to help me. And at that age in junior school, your friends having to help you fill out coloured math books and things like that. Teachers saying, "Oh, do it in a group. You help this one." It's not necessarily what you want. I mean, things have changed since then, but it certainly gave me a different perception to things, and I suppose built up my resilience, as Sarah Matthews said earlier. It does make you resilient. I didn't like having to rely on my friends, mind you. It wasn't until I went to special school that I actually found out exactly what was wrong with my eyes. So I knew that I was short-sighted, as I thought, but when you've never known any different, then you don't necessarily consider how far other people can see. So I remember attending a meeting when I'd first gone to the first special school that I'd gone to, and then being told to leave the room whilst they spoke to my parents, and I was adamant I wanted to know what the conditions were and how it was going to affect me, and things. So they gave me my diagnosis, which was basically I shouldn't have had any sight when I was born. Not just because of the aniridia, but all the other conditions that kind of came alongside that, including glaucoma and nystagmus. They said I shouldn't have had any sight, and that by the time I was 21 I'd have no sight at all. So they sent me to special school to learn to read Braille, learn about equipment, and help me cope. That was the theory anyway. So I've never been one though for fitting into a nice easy box. I don't like to be pigeonholed, I'm afraid. I like to kind of challenge what's been said and try and defy the odds a little bit. Always been a bit of a rebel. Always challenging people's perceptions. And one of the things that I remember as a child, which I think is quite funny actually, and some of you may or may not relate to this, but I remember the first special school that I went to. I actually, because we were given so much freedom as children, travelling on the bus, going into the city on our own, and being independent, and always encouraged to be independent rather than relying on our parents, I actually turned up at the school one day on my push bike. So I'd gone in on the Monday morning, I'd cycled all the way through the city centre and out the other side, and turned up on my push bike, and they kind of looked at me and went, You can't do that. You can't come to school on a push bike. It's a blind school. What will people think? We've nowhere to park your bike. We don't have a bike. And I just kind of looked at them and I thought, well, why not? You know, I mean, at the end of the day, yes, I could read road signs to some extent. I mean, I could see the pictures for bridges and speed bumps and roundabouts, but I had to stop underneath the signs to physically read the text. But I thought, well, you know, that's just what I had to do. And as I said to them, well, buses and cars and lorries and things are great big things. I said, I might not be able to see well, but they're big enough for me to see. So what's the problem? You know, so I didn't quite get that. And I did continue to ride my bike, but I stopped riding it to school. So that was probably when my sight was best, as I say, about sort of seeing about 2 meters. Things didn't start to change really until I was about 13. So at that point, just starting puberty, and the effects of the glaucoma started to kick in, which was one of the connected things with the Aniridia. Very difficult time for anybody anyway, as a teenager, having to work out what's going on in life, and then your vision starting to change, starting to get headaches, starting to learn about medication, and kind of learning to manage that myself. The one thing that I found with the Aniridia, though, was that I suppose when I look back now, I think it could have affected me a lot worse in some ways, because I couldn't wear glasses. Although I'd worn glasses as a very young child, I found it put too much pressure on my sinuses, and you were always getting lots and lots of light coming in around the edges. They didn't have the wraparound glasses that they do now, and although the tint helped, it wasn't great. So I wasn't really getting a lot of benefit out of the glasses, so I kind of discarded them. And because I've got severe dryness of the eyes, contact lenses weren't even considered as a solution at the time. I certainly hadn't considered them, but it wouldn't have been something that worked. So I ended up with a faithful baseball cap, which is great. But I tended to dress as a tomboy anyway, and jeans were fashionable, so that kind of worked. But had I been a really girly girl, I think it would have really knocked my confidence, because baseball cap just doesn't go. You know, it's just not sort of fashionable to go to a nice party with a nice dress on and stick a baseball cap on your head so that you can actually see where you're going. So it would only be on rare occasions I would not wear a baseball cap, and then I would walk around like I was frowning and squinting all the time. People used to say to me, if the wind changes, you'll stay like that, stop frowning. But I never realised I was doing it. It was just trying to control the light that was coming into my eyes, because I was getting so much brightness, and I could always find light even in the darkest places. So although I went to special school, I would still always encourage parents and that to give their children a chance in mainstream now, because I think it makes such a big difference to your social skills and the way that you view things. If that goes into your teenage years, then that's great. If not, every child's different, but I think you've got to have the opportunity to do both. So by the time I'd got over the whole teenage thing, I went through school. I got my GCSEs, got my A levels. I did go on to university as well. And as Sarah said earlier, not just resilience, but you can do as much as you can afford to fight for, really. It's not the easiest road, but I went. I did my GCSEs and A levels, then I went to mainstream college and did some more A levels. I worked in the area of mental health, and then I did social work and mental health at university. Although again, I was always challenging perceptions, because people didn't think I'd be able to do social work, working with children and families, because I couldn't see very well. And I got to the point where I actually told the university that if they couldn't find me a placement, I was taking my funding elsewhere, which didn't go down very well with them. But I'd already secured a place at another university. And eventually, I got what I wanted. I got my placement. And I actually got a social services contract out of it at the end of my course as well, which was really good. But again, it's a battle from the start. You've got to be aware and ready to kind of, I suppose, be prepared to really stand up for what you want and be determined. But if you're determined enough, you can do anything that you want, really. Lots of people didn't actually realise initially that I couldn't see very well. When I was in a familiar place, they'd not notice. And it was only when they'd suddenly go somewhere new with me, and my walking would slow and different things like that, and they'd sort of think, oh, you really can't see that well then. I'm like, well, no. That's, I told you I can't see that well, but they would suddenly realise, and I suppose I didn't realise initially just how much my brain fills in the gaps. I don't know if anybody else has that, but you get so used to your surroundings that even as my sight got less and less, I didn't always notice if I was in the house or in my local street or whatever, because I knew what was there. So until somebody went and stuck a road sign or roadworks or a new lamppost or something there, then I didn't really notice, because my brain was so used to filling in the gaps for me, which I think is rather incredible, really. I quite often find, I mean, we've all got our own ways of dealing with how people perceive us and what happens when we're out. I loathed using a white stick. I didn't like the whole symbol, the vulnerability, or kind of standing out, if you like. I was much happier just being able to walk around and people not realising. Because even when you had a white stick and you'd stop somebody and say, can you tell me where this is? They'd kind of look at you. I mean, I would stop, say, outside Boots or somewhere and say to somebody, can you tell me where Boots is? And they'd look at me and say, you're right outside it? Like, oh, okay, thank you. It was a good guess then. And they kind of look at you as if to say, I'm sure you can see. You know, they didn't know what the white stick was for whatever reason. So you quite often find that. But I mean, I would find myself tripping up steps, and occasionally you get those thin wire fences that they used to put around the sort of building sites or construction areas in and around pedestrianised shopping centres. And I would find myself occasionally bouncing off of those and sort of going, oh, is anybody looking? Look around and say, wake up, you know, as if, oh dear, it was just an accident, because I was embarrassed to sort of say, oh, you know, actually, I can't see that. And I didn't want to admit that I really should use my white stick. Not that it ever stopped me walking fast, but I just didn't like it. So, and I guess that's another thing about when you're young as well. It's that your whole kind of I'm young and cool image, isn't it? You don't want to, you know. So, I mean, I get it now. Other people now know a lot more about what the white stick means, and they're used to kind of seeing people, and we've changed their views. Although I still think that they consider if you've got a white stick that you can see something. If you've got a guide dog, you can't see anything. But you know, and then it confuses them if you've got a dog and you can see a little bit. They think that's not right. So they're still confused, you know. But it's moving. It's definitely moving forward. I've certainly found that. I did eventually get myself a job, and in between that, I was still going for appointments and things for my eyes. I got involved in some research and stuff when I was in my sort of late teens or early 20s. Funnily enough, it was here in Birmingham. It was the University Hospital, and they used to take photos to use in lectures. Because of the Aniridia and not having the muscles in my eyes, they didn't have the reflection from the blood vessels, so they used to take lots of photos of the backs of my eyes to use in lectures for teaching the students about the structures of the eyes, which I found really fascinating. And I was quite interested in that. It wasn't until I was in my second job, because I did quite a lot of call centre jobs after I'd finished my social work, that I actually had an operation to do with the glaucoma, because the pressure in my eyes was so high, and I'm one of a small percentage that actually gets pain with the pressure increase, which a lot of people don't get, but my pressure was very, very high. It was very painful. So putting my head on the pillow at night, trying to sleep, and also kind of wearing my headset at work was absolutely excruciating. So I took the opportunity, even though they couldn't guarantee I would have any sight afterwards, I took the opportunity to actually take the operation, which made a huge difference. Because I think sleep deprivation is one of the worst things, and because you can find light in the most darkest corners, it's like sleeping with a light on, and it takes my brain hours to actually think, do you know what, it's night time. And as my sight got worse, I always thought it was going to be dark, because people's perception is, and I don't know, if people haven't seen, they don't know, but I always thought, people say, it's dark when you can't see, it's black. But actually, I spoke to my dad about it. He'd lost his sight through an accident, not through a condition. And he said, no, it's not. It's white. It's bright. Unfortunately for me, as I was scared of the dark as a child, it is. It's very white, bright. It's like looking into the sunshine or somebody having a torch shining in your face, which is great in that it's not dark. So I'm quite happy with that. But as I say, when you're trying to go to sleep with that shining in your face, it's not necessarily the most easy thing to do. So I certainly got over my my issues of image and things, I did end up with a guide dog eventually, and that came just about the right time as well, because my sight had become so unstable that I could be walking along, I could see the contrast of where the grass was and the path was, and all of a sudden it would just go pure white. Everything would stop. It was like the old Daz advert, you know, brightest white possible, and you'd think, ooh, okay, where am I? How far have I got to go? And it would just intermittently happen. So by the time I got my guide dog, at least it wasn't quite so nerve-wracking, because I was walking at a constant pace, wasn't having to find obstacles to then determine where I was. I was able to orientate myself. And I don't know why I fought against having a guide dog for so long, because it was the best thing I did, to be fair. So, but that really helped. I think the whole thing that really has helped is building up your confidence as an individual, and it's a very individual, personal thing as to how you do that. And I know, and I'm sure some people that are parents and that will know, if they've already had the experiences themselves, the best thing you can do for your kids is actually give them the confidence and encourage them to go and try anything, sort of most things once, give it a go and see how they are. And so you can do anything that you want to do. Don't be held back by other people's perceptions, because you know it's that limits you. Don't fall into a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of, oh well, I can't see, I can't do anything, I'll sit in the corner. You know, we were never wrapped up in cotton wool. We were told, you know, you've got to learn to dress yourself and get up and go and do things and go and do the shopping, and that was probably the best thing that was done for us, because we weren't mollycoddled. And it's hard to let your kids go normally, and it's even harder if they've got a visual impairment or a disability, but it's the best thing that you can actually do for them. So I would probably encourage that. It's certainly what's helped me. I was expected to finish education, go to work, have a life, and I had a life before I lost my sight. And although the doctors had said I wouldn't have any sight by the time I was 21, I was actually 35. So I defied the odds again. It just shows you that although they're learning more and more, the research is so important and the individual stories are so important, because they don't really know how each individual's going to react. So, you know, it's important to always remember that you are individual, and just because it happens to one person doesn't mean everything is going to happen to you the same way, and that you should share those experiences because they're so varied. So I would just say, if there's something you want to do, go and do it, give it a go, and see how you get on with it. So that's certainly the way I tackle life now. And I don't know enough about familial aniridia to say whether it's had any effect on my latest conditions. That means I'm now oxygen reliant, etc. I don't necessarily think there's a major connection, but there may be a slight connection somewhere in terms of it affecting organs and things later in life. But my attitude's still the same. I've learned to manage it. I had a life before, I shall continue to have a life. It's just different. And no day's ever the same, and I take comfort from that, because it would be very boring. All right, so thank you for that, guys.